Hello, and today's learning targets are I can know and memorize my perfect squares and I can solve an equation when a variable is squared. Let's take a look at the examples. A perfect square is the result of multiplying any integer by itself. Let's list the perfect squares through 400. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, 6 squared is 36, 7 squared is 49, 8 squared is 64, 9 squared is 81, 10 squared is 100, 11 squared is 121, 12 squared is 144, 13 squared is 169, 14 squared is 196, 15 squared is 225, 16 squared is 256, 17 squared is 289, 18 squared is 324, 19 squared is 361, and 20 squared is 400. Please make sure you can locate the squared button on your calculator. Also, it would be a great idea to make sure you can locate the button that allows you to go to any exponent or any power you would like to find. And if you do not know where this button is, make sure you ask Miss Ratty. Now let's take a look at square roots. We will find the square roots of the following perfect squares. For now, we will only list the positive answers. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 64 is 8. The square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 100 is 10. Square root of 121 is 11. The square root of 144 is 12. Square root of 169 is 13. Square root of 196 is 14. Square root of 225 is 15. The square root of 256 is 16. Square root of 289 is 17. The square root of 324 is 18. The square root of 361 is 19. And the square root of 400 is 20. So now, like for example, 20 times 20 equals 400. So that's how we came up with the square root. And this is a perfect square, so that means these numbers divided by 20 equal exactly that same number, like 20. And so we also know that there are negatives that also can be part of the perfect squares and the square roots. Like, for example, for 9, 3 times 3 equals 9, but also negative 3 times negative 3 equals 9. But for now, we only listed the positives here in this list. So I just wanted to make sure and to let you know, to be aware of that negatives also do work here for perfect squares. So now let's look at solving equations with an x squared. So the first example, x squared equals 25. To undo the squared symbol, the opposite of something being squared is to take its square root. So if I take the square root of one side, I also must take the square root of another. And so what happens is when I have something being squared, like this variable x, but I take the square root, the x and the the squared and the square root just cancel each other out, and I'm just left with x. So let me erase this and get this out of the way here, and then we'll get back to the example so you have a lot of space to write. So now that I took the square root, I'm just left with x, and the square root of 25 is actually plus and minus 5, because we know 5 times 5 is 25, but also negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. So my two solutions are x equals plus or minus 5. And I can write here this plus and minus, and that means positive 5 and negative 5. Okay, looking at this next example, the x squared equals 36. So again, to undo something being squared, I want to take its square root. When I do that, on the left-hand side, I am just left with x. And on the right-hand side, the square root of 36 is plus and minus 6. And now, it also is a great idea in your calculator to know how to be able to type in the square root of a number. And if you do not know how to do that, we want to make sure that you ask Miss Roddy and that you can find out how to do that. Let's look at the next example. Whoops. Okay, let's look at the next example. There we go. Okay, now I am going to, before I can get to my variable x here, I have to get rid of this 4. So I have to subtract 4 from both sides. When I do that, I'm left with x squared equals 13 minus 4 is 9. And now to undo something being squared, I will take the square root. And again, when I take the square root of something being squared, those two operations are inverse operations and they cancel out. So I'm left with x equals plus or minus 3. And now I'm going to check my answer here. So I'm going to plug 3 back in for x and negative 3 back in for x and solve this equation. So what this looks like is 3 squared plus 4 should equal 13. And this is 9 plus 4 does equal 13. Now I'll use negative 3 and check that answer. And when I check that answer, negative 3 squared is also positive 9, plus 4 does equal 13. So we know that we're correct. All right, let's continue on. And it looks like I skipped one over on the right-hand side, so I'm going to solve that one first, right over here, because it's a little bit simpler. So x squared equals 289. To undo that x being squared, take the square root and get x equals, and do you remember the square root of 289? You got it, it's 17. So x equals plus or minus 17. Okay, let's continue on. Let's get back to this example right here. And I have x squared minus 8 equals 392. So again, let's isolate my x squared, and let's do the opposite of a negative 8 here, and let's add 8 to both sides. And when I do that, I get x squared equals 400. And then to undo the x being squared, we'll take the square root, and x equals plus or minus 20. And again, we can check our answer, so we'll plug in 20 back in for x. And when we do that, we get 20 squared minus 8 equals 392, and negative 20 squared minus 8 equals 392. And 20 squared is 400, minus 8 is 392, so we're good to go on that one. And here, negative 20 minus 8, negative 20 is also positive 400, minus 8 does equal 392. So we're right. Let's take a look at our last example. Now we have a little bit more going on here with this 3x squared is equal to 243. So I don't see anything, adding or subtracting from the x squared, but I do see a 3 being multiplied by it. So we need to figure out how to isolate that x squared and do the inverse operation of 3 being multiplied by x squared. And the inverse operation there would be to divide by 3 to both sides to get rid of that 3 that's in front of the x squared. And then I'm left with, on the left-hand side, x squared is equal to, and 243 divided by 3 is 81. And that turned out really nice because now if I take the square root of both sides, 81 is a perfect square, and the square root of 81 is plus or minus 9. And so that would be our answer here to that last example. Okay, so let's determine which two whole numbers the following square roots would fall in between. So we need to recall those perfect squares that we had just wrote down. So the square root of 55. Which two perfect squares does the square root of 55 fit into? Well, we know the square root of 49 is below the square root of 55, and then what's above 49 would be the square root of 64, and that would be 8. So we're between, what, 7 and 8. So determine which two whole numbers the following square roots would fall in between. This would be 7 and 8. Now we could probably estimate what that will be. Square root of 55 is actually, it's closer to the square root of 49, right? So it would probably be around 7.4. Because again, it's closer to the 7. But we just need to determine which two whole numbers the following square root falls between. So we did that, 7 and 8. So now let's look at the square root of 250. Well, if you recall from the last page that we wrote our perfect squares on, 15 squared is 225, and then 16 squared is 256. So 250 would be in between 225 and 256 if we were taking the square roots, right? So that would be in between which two whole numbers? 15 and 16. The square root of 325. So the square root of 325 would be between, well, we know that 18 squared, 18 would be with 324, which is right below 325. So therefore 19 would be above it, and that would be 361 in the square root of those. So 325 is between 18, whoops, let's fix that, 18 and 19, and it actually is very close to 18, right, because 325 is very close to 324. All right, and the square root of 200, well, we know that 14 squared is 196, right? Square root of 196 is 14, and then the square root of 225 would be 15. So we know that 200 is a little above 196, but definitely below 225. So this would be between 14 and 15. Okay, let's move on. Determine which whole number is closest to the given square roots. So again, we want to estimate which square roots the number is between, and then let's see which one it actually is closest to. So the square root of 27, well, we know that 25, the square root of 25 is very close to it, and that would be 5. And then I'm going to move that over a little bit. Let's move these. So square root of 25 would be 5. And then right above that would be 36, and that would be 6. Square root of that would be 6, but what is 27 closer to? 25 or 36? Well, it's closer to 25, so the whole number that's closest to the square root would be 5. So now let's look at 220. So if we think about our perfect squares, we have 14 squared is 196. So 196 goes with 14. And then above 14 would be 15, and the square root of 225 equals 15. So we know that 220 fits somewhere between these two, so which is it closer to? Well, it's only 5 away from 225, but definitely more than 5 away from 196. So here it would be closest to the whole number of 15. Okay, let's look at the square root of 105. And so I know that the square root of 100 is 10, and then above that would be 121, and that square root would be 11. And 105 is only 5 off from 100, but a lot more off than 5 from 121. So this would be closest to the whole number of 10. Now let's look at the square root of 306. Well, if you recall, 17 squared is the square root of 289. Well, the square root of 289 equals 17. 17 squared equals 289. And then that's a little bit lower than 306. So what's above 306 is 18 squared, and that's 324. So the square root of 324 equals 18. So 306 fits between the two, but which one is it closer to? Well, 306 minus 289 gives me 17 off. Okay? And then 324 minus 306 is 18 off. So what is it closer to? Well, 17 off from 17, but 18 off from 18, or sorry, 17 off from 289 and 18 off from 324. So this would be closer to the whole number of 17 just by a very little bit. So actually, the square root of 306 is about 17.49, which is closer to 17 than it would be to 18. And also, it's really good to make sure you know how to take the square root of a number in your calculator, so make sure you're using the correct buttons. Second, and then your x squared button to get you the square root. And please make sure you know how to get something or number squared. So take a number and then press the x squared button to square it. It's really important that you know those correct buttons on your calculator. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.